In the complex and often contentious arena of U.S. China relations, a fragile truce is being tested as both nations engage in a strategic game of export controls, raising concerns about the long-term implications for global trade and supply chains. Following a recent agreement to suspend tariffs, which was celebrated as a significant step toward de-escalation, the two powers are now leveraging export restrictions that threaten to unravel their tentative peace. On May 12, U.S. and Chinese officials announced a pause on recently imposed tariffs, a move that offered a glimmer of hope amid the escalating trade war. However, just a day later, the United States imposed new restrictions on Huawei's semiconductor technology, a decision that highlighted the ongoing tensions. President Trump's administration has been particularly vigilant regarding Chinese technology companies, arguing that such measures protect national security and prevent the transfer of advanced technologies to military applications. Simultaneously, China has retaliated by restricting the export of rare earth magnets, materials crucial for various industries including automotive and aerospace. This move is particularly alarming given that approximately 90% of the world's rare earth metals are produced in China. The ramifications of these controls were felt almost immediately, as seen when Ford Motor Company had to temporarily halt production at its Chicago plant due to a shortage of these essential components. Hundreds of EU companies are impacted, and we expect that this may lead to production stoppages already this week for some companies, warned Jens Eskelund, president of the European Union Chamber of Commerce in China. This sentiment reflects a growing concern among global businesses about their reliance on Chinese supply chains, particularly in light of the escalating trade frictions. The U.S. Commerce Department's actions against Huawei following the Geneva Agreement have drawn sharp criticism from Chinese officials. Ministry of Commerce spokesperson He Yongqian urged the United States to cease its discriminatory restrictive measures, asserting that such actions undermine the consensus reached in Geneva. The ongoing trade skirmish is not merely about tariffs but has evolved into a broader struggle over technological dominance and supply chain security. The implications of this decoupling are profound. While both countries continue to assert their positions, experts caution that the increasing reliance on export controls may lead multinational companies to re-evaluate their supply chains. As Zhu Ning, deputy dean at the Shanghai Advanced Institute of Finance, noted, China sees export controls on rare earths as a counterstrike to U.S. export controls on semiconductors. This cycle of retaliation could potentially accelerate calls for companies to diversify their supply chains away from China, a trend that is already beginning to take shape in Europe. As the dust settles from recent events, the question remains, how long can both nations maintain their current course without inciting further economic disruption? The fragile truce, while a positive development, hangs in the balance as both sides leverage their respective strengths to gain an upper hand. Chris Adams, a former Treasury official, expressed concern that it would be unfortunate if one or both sides overestimates its own leverage in this high-stakes game. Looking ahead, the trajectory of U.S. China relations will be closely watched as businesses and governments alike navigate this complex landscape. The balance between cooperation and competition will be critical in determining whether the recent agreements can lead to a more stable economic future or if the specter of increased decoupling will dominate the narrative. As both nations grapple with their interdependence and competition, the global economy remains poised on the edge of a new era defined by strategic maneuvering and cautious diplomacy. To in a significant and contentious escalation in U.S. China Relations, Secretary of State Marco Rubio announced that the Trump administration will aggressively revoke visas for Chinese students, particularly targeting those with connections to the Chinese Communist Party or enrolled in what the administration deems critical fields. This announcement, made during a Senate Foreign Relations Committee hearing, has raised alarms among university communities in the United States and could prompt retaliatory actions from Beijing. The crackdown comes amid an atmosphere of heightened tension between the two nations, exacerbated by ongoing trade disputes and geopolitical rivalries. Rubio's declaration signals a renewed focus on scrutinizing Chinese students, a demographic that constitutes a substantial portion of the international student population in the U.S. In the 2024 academic year, approximately 20% of all student visas were granted to Chinese nationals, accounting for nearly 277,000 students. However, the recent trend has shown a slight decline in Chinese student enrollment, while numbers from India have surged. The exact criteria that will define critical fields remain vague, but they are likely to include disciplines such as engineering, technology, and the physical sciences. U.S. officials have expressed concerns in recent years over the potential for Chinese students to transfer knowledge and skills back to their government, particularly in areas that could bolster military capabilities. Nonetheless, evidence to support widespread espionage or technology theft by students has not been substantiated. Rubio's announcement has stirred anxiety among the approximately 275,000 Chinese students currently studying in the U.S., as well as the professors and institutions that rely on them for both research contributions and tuition revenue. I think it is terribly misguided, counterproductive, and another way in which we are shooting ourselves in the foot, commented Michael S. Roth, president of Wesleyan University, reflecting a sentiment echoed by many in academia. This new directive is a continuation of previous measures taken during the Trump administration, which included the revocation of over 1,000 visas in 2020 for Chinese students linked to military institutions. The Biden administration maintained these restrictions, emphasizing a bipartisan consensus on the perceived threat posed by China. Currently, Rubio's announcement indicates that the scrutiny will extend to all future visa applications from China and Hong Kong. The implications of this visa revocation policy are profound, not only for the students affected but also for the broader U.S. China relationship. The move comes at a time when both nations are grappling with an increasing degree of mistrust. China's foreign ministry responded to the visa policy by labeling it discriminatory, suggesting that it would only serve to undermine America's global reputation. While the response from Beijing was relatively muted, it underscores the ongoing complexities in diplomatic relations, particularly in light of earlier commitments by Chinese President Xi Jinping to promote educational exchanges. The potential fallout from this policy could extend beyond the immediate impacts on students. Many American universities have long benefited from the tuition revenue generated by international students, which is essential for their financial health. A significant reduction in Chinese enrollment might lead to fiscal challenges for various institutions, particularly those heavily reliant on foreign tuition. Moreover, the crackdown may inadvertently bolster China's ambitions to enhance its own educational and technological capabilities. If a substantial number of Chinese students are deterred from studying in the U.S., it could accelerate the return of talent to China, aligning with Beijing's goals of fostering innovation and high-tech growth domestically. Jessica Chen Weiss, a professor at Johns Hopkins University, warns that creating a hostile environment for overseas students could push valuable talent back to China. Echoing historical instances where restrictive U.S. policies led to the loss of prominent scientific minds to their home countries. As the Biden administration grapples with these complex dynamics, it remains to be seen how the State Department and Homeland Security will implement these new restrictions and whether further retaliatory measures from China will follow. The situation is evolving, and the outcome of these policies will likely shape not only the future of U.S. China relations but also the landscape of higher education in America. With tensions continuing to rise, the potential for further escalation looms, leaving many to ponder the long-term consequences of these developments on global collaboration in science, technology, and education. In a striking revelation, a comprehensive investigation by the Bureau of Investigative Journalism (TBIJ) has exposed the extensive use of forced labor involving Uyghurs and other ethnic minorities in China, linking over 100 global brands to this systemic exploitation. The report, published in partnership with the New York Times and Der Spiegel, highlights how these workers are recruited through a government-sponsored program that forcibly relocates them from Xinjiang, China's westernmost region, to factories located thousands of miles away in eastern provinces. This practice raises serious ethical concerns and risks significant legal repercussions for the implicated companies, particularly under U.S. laws designed to combat forced labor. The investigation sheds light on the grim realities faced by these workers, many of whom are coerced into labor under the threat of detention. Videos discovered on Douyin, the Chinese counterpart of TikTok, depict Uyghur workers operating machinery in factories supplying parts to well-known brands such as Tesla and Samsung. The unsettling narratives captured in these clips reveal a stark contrast between the traditional Uyghur culture and the harsh conditions of industrial labor. As Laura Murphy, a human rights advocate, poignantly noted, this is not a choice. This is not consent, underscoring the coercive nature of such employment arrangements. Through extensive analysis of thousands of videos, TBIJ established a detailed picture of how China's labor transfer program has become a critical component of its economic strategy. The report identifies 75 factories across 11 regions that utilize forced labor, producing a range of goods from electronics to automotive parts. This labor transfer scheme has been framed by the Chinese government as a means of poverty alleviation, yet it serves a dual purpose of cultural assimilation and economic gain, as it systematically undermines the identities of ethnic minorities. Current international responses to the situation have largely concentrated on products originating from Xinjiang, notably cotton. However, TBIJ's findings reveal that the implications of forced labor extend far beyond the province's borders, infiltrating supply chains across various industries worldwide. Major brands including Apple and Volkswagen have stated that they are investigating these allegations, but the lack of independent oversight raises questions about the effectiveness of their supply chain audits. The investigation further illustrates that the scale of the problem is not merely anecdotal but instead represents a significant facet of China's economic machinery. With trade data revealing over 145,000 consignments exported from implicated factories, the challenge for global consumers becomes increasingly complex. Many everyday products, from shoes to electronics, are entangled with this dark undercurrent of exploitation, complicating the efforts of conscientious consumers to avoid complicity in human rights abuses. Moreover, the Chinese government's narrative surrounding this program emphasizes economic development and stability, presenting it as a necessary measure in the face of perceived threats to national security. This perspective is underscored by President Xi Jinping's call for increased job creation for Uyghurs outside their home region, which has been framed as an opportunity for personal growth. However, as TBIJ's findings indicate, the reality is one of systemic coercion and cultural erasure. As the international community grapples with these revelations, the implications for future trade relations are profound. The U.S. has enacted legislation such as the Uyghur Forced Labor Prevention Act, which aims to curb imports linked to forced labor. However, the efficacy of such measures remains to be seen, particularly as goods produced by implicated factories continue to reach global markets through complex supply chains. In conclusion, the TBIJ's investigation not only exposes the troubling realities of forced labor in China but also challenges the narrative of economic progress that the Chinese government promotes. As global awareness grows, the pressure on corporations to ensure ethical supply chains will likely intensify. The coming years will be crucial in determining how international trade policies evolve, particularly in relation to human rights and corporate accountability. As consumers become more informed, the demand for transparency and ethical practices in supply chains will be paramount in shaping the future landscape of global commerce. In a significant development in Asian security dynamics, China's Defense Minister Dong Jun will not be attending the upcoming Shangri-La Dialogue in Singapore, an annual security summit that draws defense officials and military leaders from around the world. This absence is notable, particularly as U.S. Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth is set to make his debut at the forum, thus underscoring the increasing tensions between the two nations. The Shangri-La Dialogue, scheduled to take place from May 30 to June 1, 2025, serves as a key platform for dialogue on security issues in the Asia-Pacific region. Instead of a ministerial presence, China will send a delegation from the People's Liberation Army National Defense University, as confirmed by Senior Colonel Zhang Xiaojiang, a spokesperson for the Ministry of National Defense. This lower-level representation could be interpreted as a reflection of China's current diplomatic posture, which has become more cautious amid rising geopolitical tensions. Zhang emphasized the importance of military relations with the United States, stating, "We hope the U.S. side will earnestly respect China's core interests and major concerns, meet China halfway, and promote the healthy, stable development of bilateral military relations." This statement hints at China's desire to maintain a degree of engagement even as it opts for a lower-profile representation at a major international forum. The backdrop to this diplomatic maneuvering includes recent comments from U.S. military officials who have characterized China as a potential adversary. In response to these assertions, Zhang urged the U.S. to refrain from conjuring up a powerful enemy for itself, arguing that such narratives are both irrational and dangerous. He called for mutual respect and peaceful coexistence, reinforcing a narrative that seeks to counterbalance U.S. military posturing in the region. The absence of high-ranking Chinese officials at the Shangri-La dialogue may signify a strategic choice to sidestep direct confrontation while still maintaining a semblance of engagement through the lower-level delegation. Analysts suggest that this could be a tactical move to manage perceptions while preparing for future interactions under less contentious circumstances. As the dialogue unfolds, its outcomes may further influence the trajectory of U.S. China relations, particularly in the military domain. The focus will remain on whether any significant bilateral discussions will arise from this gathering and how both nations will navigate the complexities of their relationship moving forward. With the Shangri-La dialogue set to commence shortly, all eyes will be on the interactions that take place, particularly in light of China's strategic absence at a time when defense dialogues are critical for regional stability. Future developments will likely hinge on the responses from both sides and their willingness to engage in constructive dialogue amidst rising tensions. In a significant escalation of diplomatic tensions, China has strongly criticized the United States for its recent decision to impose restrictions on student visas for Chinese nationals. The U.S. State Department's measures aimed at enhancing scrutiny of visa applications particularly target students with connections to the Chinese Communist Party or those studying in critical fields. This move, articulated by Secretary of State Marco Rubio, has been described by Beijing as discriminatory and indicative of a broader trend of politicization in U.S. foreign relations. During a press briefing, Chinese Foreign Ministry spokeswoman Mao Ning condemned the U.S. actions, asserting that they undermine the lawful rights of Chinese students and disrupt the exchanges between nations. Such a politicized and discriminatory move lays bare the U.S. lie of its so-called freedom and openness, she stated, emphasizing that these actions will further tarnish America's image on the global stage. The announcement follows a series of previous measures, including a freeze on new visa interviews for international students, signaling a tightening grip on academic exchanges that have long been a hallmark of U.S. cultural diplomacy. The implications of these restrictions are profound, potentially affecting thousands of students seeking education in the U.S., which has traditionally been viewed as a premier destination for higher learning. The move comes amid a backdrop of deteriorating U.S. China relations, where ideological differences and national security concerns increasingly dominate the dialogue. The Biden administration is likely viewing these measures as necessary steps to address perceived threats from China, but critics argue that they risk isolating the U.S. from a generation of potential leaders and innovators. As the geopolitical landscape shifts, China's reaction is not merely a defense of its students but a broader critique of U.S. foreign policy that it perceives as hypocritical. This stance resonates with a growing narrative in China that frames Western actions as aggressive and exclusionary, thus rallying domestic support for a more assertive foreign policy stance. In related developments, China is also expanding its influence in regions such as the Pacific Islands, where it has pledged to undertake numerous projects addressing climate change and sustainable development. This initiative, framed as part of the Belt and Road Initiative, aims to enhance economic ties and cooperation in sectors such as clean energy and tourism. Critics of China's approach label it as debt trap diplomacy, arguing that it manipulates economically vulnerable nations into unsustainable debt burdens. Nonetheless, Chinese officials assert that they are responding to legitimate needs for development and support in these regions. As global dynamics continue to evolve, the ramifications of the U.S. visa restrictions and China's countermeasures will likely reverberate throughout international relations. The educational and cultural exchanges that have historically served as bridges between nations are now at risk, potentially leading to a more insular and divided future. Observers will be watching closely to see how both countries navigate these challenges and whether there is room for dialogue and reconciliation amid rising tensions. The ability of both nations to manage these developments will be crucial in determining their respective roles on the world stage moving forward.